Joseph, from the pit to the palace, trusting God's plan in every season. Introduction. Have you ever faced a situation where you felt betrayed by the people closest to you? Have you gone through trials that made you question whether God was still with you? Today, we will journey through the life of Joseph, a man who experienced deep betrayal, unfair treatment, and painful waiting. Yet, he never lost faith in God. His story in Genesis 37-50 teaches us powerful lessons on overcoming betrayal and choosing forgiveness, trusting God's timing and purpose, remaining faithful even in trials. If you are in a season of struggle, feeling forgotten, or facing challenges that seem unfair, Joseph's story will inspire you to keep trusting God, because He is working behind the scenes for your good. 1. Betrayed but not defeated. Overcoming betrayal and forgiveness, Genesis 37:18-28. Joseph's story. Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob, and his father made it clear by giving him a special coat of many colors. His brothers grew jealous of him, especially when he shared a dream from God that showed him ruling over them. Their jealousy turned into hatred, and they plotted against him. One day, when Joseph went to check on his brothers, they threw him into a pit and later sold him into slavery to traders heading to Egypt. He went from being a beloved son to a slave in a foreign land. Lesson. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. Joseph didn't let betrayal define him. He chose to trust God rather than live in anger or bitterness. Later in his life, Joseph forgave his brothers, showing us that forgiveness is a choice, not a feeling. Application. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? How can you respond with forgiveness instead of bitterness? Ask God for the strength to forgive, just like Joseph did. Key verse. Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. 2. Faithful in the midst of trials. Trusting God even in the darkest seasons. Genesis 39:1-23. Joseph's story. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer of Pharaoh. Even as a slave, he worked with excellence, and Potiphar noticed his integrity. Soon, Joseph was put in charge of Potiphar's entire household. However, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of trying to attack her, and he was thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. Imagine how Joseph must have felt, betrayed by his own family, wrongfully imprisoned, forgotten in a foreign land. But even in prison, Joseph remained faithful. He served with excellence and gained favor with the prison warden. He also interpreted dreams for fellow prisoners, though one of them forgot about him for 2 more years. Lesson: delays are not denials. Even though Joseph was stuck in prison, God was still with him. Remain faithful where you are, even if it's not where you want to be. Your trials are preparing you for your purpose. If Joseph hadn't learned to lead in Potiphar's house and in prison, he wouldn't have been ready to lead in Pharaoh's palace. Application. Are you in a difficult season? Are you waiting on a promise from God but seeing no progress? Instead of complaining, serve faithfully where you are and trust that God is preparing you for something greater. Key verse, Genesis chapter 39:21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. 3. God's timing is perfect. From the pit to the palace. Genesis 41:14-46. Joseph's story. One night, Pharaoh had 2 troubling dreams. None of his magicians or advisors could interpret them. That's when the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph, the man who had interpreted his dream in prison 2 years earlier. Joseph was brought before Pharaoh, and with God's wisdom, he explained the meaning of the dreams. 7 years of plenty would come, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph also proposed a plan to save Egypt from the coming crisis. Pharaoh was so impressed that he appointed Joseph as the second in command of all Egypt. In just one moment, Joseph went from being a prisoner to a prince. Lesson: your waiting season is not wasted. Joseph waited 13 years before his breakthrough came. When it's God's time to elevate you, no one can stop it. God's blessings often come suddenly. One day, Joseph was in prison. The next, he was ruling Egypt. Application. Are you feeling forgotten? God has not forgotten you. Keep preparing because your breakthrough is coming. Trust God's timing, even when it doesn't make sense. Key verse, Habakkuk 2:3. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it lingers, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. 4. Choosing forgiveness over revenge. The power of restoration. Genesis 45:1-15. Joseph's story. Years later, during the famine, Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt in search of food. They did not recognize him, but Joseph recognized them. Instead of seeking revenge, he tested their hearts and then revealed his identity. Rather than punishing them, Joseph wept, embraced them, and forgave them completely. Lesson: forgiveness sets you free. Holding on to past pain keeps you in bondage. God can use even the worst betrayals for good. If Joseph hadn't been sold into slavery, he wouldn't have been in position to save his family. Forgiveness restores relationships. Joseph not only forgave his brothers, but also blessed them with food and land in Egypt. Application: who do you need to forgive today? Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what happened, but it releases you from bitterness. Ask God to help you see the bigger picture. He can turn any situation for good. Key verse, Colossians 3:13. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Conclusion. Key takeaways. People may betray you, but God never will. Trust God in the waiting. He is preparing you. Remain faithful even in difficult seasons. When the time is right, God will elevate you. Forgiveness brings healing and restoration. Final prayer. Lord, I thank you that even in the hardest times, you are working behind the scenes. Help me to trust your timing, remain faithful in trials, and forgive those who have hurt me. I believe that you are working all things for my good. Amen.